He sat in the darkest corner of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, wearing a frayed grey cardigan and scuffed loafers. To the arrogance of the staff at the Sterling Reserve, he looked like a confused tourist or a vagrant who had wandered in off Fifth Avenue. They sneered, they stalled, and they openly mocked him, saving their smiles for the flashy celebrities and Wall Street sharks nearby. But they made a fatal calculation. They didn't know that the quiet old man wasn't just a patron. He was the man who could buy their entire lives with a signature. Only one person saw him, a struggling waitress named Sophie. And when she leaned in and whispered 4 simple words in his native tongue, the balance of power in that room didn't just shift, it shattered. This is the story of how kindness became the ultimate weapon. The air inside the Sterling Reserve always smelled of truffle oil, old money, and desperation. Located in the heart of Midtown Manhattan, it was the kind of place where a bottle of sparkling water cost more than most people's hourly wage, and the reservations list was guarded more strictly than the nuclear codes. The walls were lined with mahogany. The chandeliers were imported crystal from Austria, and the clientele consisted entirely of people who wanted to be seen, but not touched. For Sophie, a 24-year-old waitress with worn-out insoles and a mountain of student debt, the restaurant was a battlefield. Table 7 needs a refill on the 82 Chateau Margaux, and if you spill a drop, I'll deduct the bottle from your paycheck, hissed a voice behind her. Sophie flinched, tightening her grip on the silver tray. She didn't need to turn around to know it was Derek. Derek wasn't just the floor manager. He was a tyrant in a 3-piece Italian suit. He had slicked back blonde hair, a jawline that looked surgically enhanced, and a soul that had seemingly withered away years ago. He treated the wealthy patrons like gods, and his staff like insects. "Understood, Derek," Sophie said, keeping her eyes on the floor. "And fix your apron," Derek snapped, dusting an invisible speck of lint off his own shoulder. "You look like you just rolled out of a laundromat in Queens. Remember where you are. The Sterling Reserve is about excellence. Perception is reality, Sophie. If you look poor, the guests feel poor. And we don't do poor here." Sophie bit her lip, swallowing the sharp retort that was bubbling in her throat. She needed this job. Her mother's medical bills were piling up on the kitchen counter of their tiny Bronx apartment, and the tips at the Sterling were the only thing keeping the lights on. "Yes, sir," she murmured, hurrying out onto the floor. The dinner rush was beginning. The dining room was a sea of designer dresses and tailored suits. At table 4, a tech CEO was loudly bragging about his latest acquisition, while his date looked bored. At table 9, a famous Broadway producer was verbally abusing a busboy because his soup was 3 degrees too cold. It was a chaotic symphony of ego and excess. Sophie moved through it with practiced grace, pouring wine, folding napkins, and smiling until her cheeks ached. She had become an expert at being invisible, a ghost in a uniform, existing only to serve whims. Then, the heavy oak doors at the entrance creaked open. The hostess, a tall woman named Jessica, who modeled on the weekends and had a personality as cold as dry ice, looked up from her podium. Her professional smile instantly vanished, replaced by a look of sheer confusion and mild disgust. Walking into the restaurant was a man who clearly didn't belong. He was elderly, perhaps in his late 70s, with a face mapped by deep wrinkles and hair the color of steel wool. But it was his attire that stopped the room. In a sea of tuxedos and silk gowns, he wore a simple, slightly oversized grey cardigan, beige slacks that were a little too short, and brown walking shoes that had seen better days. He held a canvas tote bag in one hand and a cane in the other. He looked less like a billionaire and more like a grandfather who had gotten lost on his way to the library. Jessica stepped out from behind the podium, effectively blocking his path. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her voice dripping with that specific brand of polite condescension reserved for people who clearly couldn't afford the menu. The old man smiled gently, bowing his head slightly. "Yes, please. Dinner for one." Jessica blinked, glancing over his shoulder as if looking for the real customer. "Do you have a reservation?" "No," the man said softly. "I do not. Is there space?" Jessica let out a short, sharp laugh, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Sir, the Sterling Reserve is booked months in advance. We don't just have space." "I see some empty tables," the man said, gesturing with a trembling hand toward the back of the room. "Those are reserved for our VIPs," Jessica lied smoothly. "I'm afraid you'll have to leave. There's a diner 2 blocks down. That might be more your speed." Sophie, who was polishing glasses at the side station, watched the interaction with a knot in her stomach. She hated the way Jessica looked at him, like he was a stain on the carpet. Suddenly, Derek materialized. He had an uncanny radar for undesirable elements. He marched over to the entrance, his polished shoes clicking aggressively on the marble. "Is there a problem here?" Derek asked, his eyes scanning the old man from head to toe with open disdain. "This gentleman believes he can dine with us without a reservation," Jessica smirked. Derek let out a heavy sigh, crossing his arms. He loomed over the smaller man. "Listen, pal, this isn't a soup kitchen. We have a dress code, and we have a standard. You are violating both. Please exit the premises before I call security to escort you out." The old man didn't seem angry. He just looked tired. "I am hungry," he said simply, "and I have money to pay." "I don't care if you have a pocket full of quarters," Derek sneered. "You're disturbing the ambiance. Get out." Sophie couldn't watch any more. She dropped her polishing cloth and stepped forward, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Derek," she said, her voice shaking slightly. Derek whipped his head around, his eyes narrowing. "Sophie, get back to your station." "Table 14 is open," she said quickly, referencing a small, 2-top table near the swinging kitchen doors. It was the worst table in the house, usually reserved for tourists the staff didn't want to deal with. "It's 8:01 p.m. The reservation for that table was a no-show 40 minutes ago. We can seat him there." Derek glared at her, his face flushing red. "Excuse me?" "He's just one person," Sophie pressed, ignoring the warning bells ringing in her head. "I'll take the table. I'll serve him. He won't bother anyone." The old man looked at Sophie. His dark eyes, which had been dull and weary, suddenly sparked with a flicker of interest. He studied her face, as if memorizing it. Derek looked from Sophie to the old man, calculating. He knew Sophie was right about the table, and causing a scene in the lobby was bad for business. "Fine," Derek spat. "Put him at 14. But if he can't pay the bill, Sophie, it's coming out of your tips. And get him out of there in 45 minutes. I don't want him stinking up the place when the senator arrives." Derek turned on his heel and stormed off. Jessica rolled her eyes and returned to her phone. Sophie turned to the old man and offered a warm, genuine smile. "Right this way, sir. I'm sorry about the wait." The man bowed again, deeper this time. "Thank you," he said. As she led him through the crowded dining room, Sophie noticed the whispers. Patrons pointed. A woman in pearls audibly gasped. It was like she was walking a stray dog through a palace. But the old man walked with his head high, clutching his canvas bag, ignoring the daggers being stared into his back. She seated him at the small table near the kitchen. The noise of clattering pans and shouting chefs was loud here, and the draft from the service door was cold. "I apologize for the noise," Sophie said, as she handed him the heavy leather-bound menu. It's the best I could do." "It is perfect," the man said. His voice was raspy but calm. "Thank you, child." Sophie poured him a glass of water. "Can I start you off with something to drink? A wine list, perhaps?" The man looked at the menu, then at the water glass. "Just tea, please. Green tea, if you have it." "We do," Sophie said. "I'll brew a fresh pot." She turned to leave, but she saw him reach into his canvas bag and pull out a worn, paperback book. The cover was torn, and the text was vertical. It was Japanese. Sophie froze. Her grandmother had been a nurse in Okinawa for 20 years before moving back to the States. Sophie had spent every summer of her childhood sitting on her grandmother's porch, learning the intricate sounds and rhythms of the language. It had been years since she used it, but the characters on the book cover were unmistakable. She looked at the man again. Really looked at him. He wasn't just some wanderer. There was a precision in the way he placed his napkin on his lap, a stillness in his posture. She took a breath, leaned in closer so the nearby tables wouldn't hear, and made a choice that would change her life forever. Sophie lowered her voice, softening her tone to match the intimate quietness the old man seemed to carry with him. "Ocha o sugu ni o mochi shimasu. Nanika tokubetsu na go yobo wa arimasu ka?" "I will bring the tea right away. Do you have any special requests?" The effect was instantaneous. The old man's hands, which had been resting on the tablecloth, flinched. His head snapped up. The cloudy, tired look in his eyes vanished, replaced by a sharp, piercing clarity. He stared at Sophie as if she had just grown wings. For a long silence, he didn't speak. He just studied her, her cheap uniform, her tired eyes, the name tag that read Sophie. "Nihongo ga hanaseru no desu ka?" "You can speak Japanese?" he asked, his voice trembling with genuine shock. Sophie smiled, feeling the familiar syllables roll off her tongue. "Sukoshi dake desu. Sobo ni osowarimashita." "Only a little. My grandmother taught me." The old man's face broke into a smile that transformed him. The wrinkles seemed to deepen, not with age, but with warmth. It was the first time anyone had smiled at him since he entered the building. "Ah," he exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "Sora wa ureshi desu ne." That is, very happy, pleasing. He switched back to English, his accent thick but dignified. "I did not expect to hear my mother tongue in this place, especially not from—" He gestured around the room, at the cold marble and the colder people. "In a place so far from home." "Home is where you make it, I guess," Sophie said kindly. "But I know this place can feel a little unfriendly." "Unfriendly," the man chuckled softly. "That is a polite word for it. They look at me and see a beggar. They do not look close enough." "I see a guest," Sophie said firmly, "and my guest needs tea." She hurried to the wait station. As she prepared the teapot, making sure the water wasn't boiling so it wouldn't scorch the delicate leaves, a trick her grandmother taught her, Derek loomed over her shoulder again. "What are you doing?" he barked. "Getting tea for table 14, Sophie said, keeping her head down. "Tea? We sell bottles of wine for $5,000, and you're wasting time brewing tea for a homeless guy?" Derek scoffed, checking his Rolex. "Whatever. Just make sure he pays up front. I don't trust him. People like that eat and dash." "He's not people like that," Sophie muttered, placing a ceramic cup on the tray. "What did you say?" Derek snapped. "Nothing, Derek. I'm taking the tea out." When Sophie returned to the table, the old man was observing the room. He wasn't looking at the decor. He was watching the staff. He watched how Derek berated a busboy for dropping a fork. He watched how Jessica ignored the phone ringing to text her boyfriend. He was taking mental notes. Sophie placed the tea down with 2 hands, a gesture of respect she remembered from her childhood. "Here you are," she whispered. The man took a sip, closing his eyes. "Perfect," he murmured. "You know, young lady, most people burn the leaves. You did not." "My grandmother would have killed me if I did," Sophie joked. "What is your name?" the man asked, placing the cup down. "Sophie. Sophie Miller." "Sophie-san," the man nodded. "I am Kenji." "Nice to meet you, Kenji-san," she replied. "Tell me, Sophie," Kenji asked, his eyes suddenly serious. "Why are you working in a place like this? You seem too kind for this atmosphere." Sophie sighed, checking to make sure Derek wasn't within earshot. "The pay is good. Well, the tips are usually good. My mum, she's sick. She needs surgery on her spine. Insurance covers some, but not enough. So I work here, and I work at a coffee shop in the mornings." Kenji listened intently, his face unreadable. "You work hard for your family. That is honorable." "It's just what you do," Sophie shrugged. "She took care of me. Now I take care of her." Kenji nodded slowly. He reached for the menu. "I will have the Wagyu beef, please." Sophie paused. The Wagyu beef was the most expensive item on the menu, $300 for a 6-ounce steak. Derek had warned her to make sure he could pay. She hesitated, not wanting to insult him, but also terrified of Derek's wrath if the card was declined. "Sir, Kenji-san," she started delicately. It's a very large portion, and quite pricey." Kenji looked up at her, a mischievous twinkle in his eye. "Do you think I cannot afford it, Sophie-san?" "No, I mean," Sophie stammered. "It is okay," he chuckled. "I am celebrating tonight. Please. The Wagyu." "Okay," Sophie smiled. "And how would you like that cooked?" "Medium rare. And—" He paused. "I would like to order a bottle of wine. The Romanée Conti." Sophie dropped her pen. The Romanée Conti was listed at $14,000. The entire restaurant usually went silent when a bottle was ordered. "Kenji-san," Sophie whispered, her face pale. "That bottle it's $14,000. "I know," Kenji said calmly. "Is it in stock?" "Yes, but—" "Then bring it, and bring 2 glasses. 2? 1 for me, and 1 for you. You must toast with me." I can't drink on the job, I'll get fired," Sophie said, her mind racing. Was this man senile? Did he think he was in a dream? "Just a sip then," Kenji smiled. "Please, place the order." Sophie walked back to the computer terminal, her hands shaking. She keyed in the order: 1 Wagyu beef, 1 bottle Romanée Conti. As soon as she hit enter, the system flagged the order for manager approval. Within 10 seconds, Derek was sprinting across the dining room, his face a mask of fury. He grabbed Sophie by the arm, dragging her into the service hallway near the kitchen. "Are you insane?" Derek hissed, spit flying from his mouth. "You just rang in a $14,000 bottle of wine for the hobo at table 14. Are you trying to get us all fired?" "He ordered it," Sophie defended herself, pulling her arm away. "He can't pay for it," Derek shouted. "Look at him. He's probably off his meds. If I open that bottle and his card declines, that's 14 grand down the drain. The owners will have my head." "He insisted," Sophie said. "He knows the price." "I'm not doing it," Derek growled. He straightened his tie and smoothed his hair. "I'm going over there, and I'm going to kick him out for good. This charade is over." "Derek, no, please," Sophie begged. "Just ask him for a card up front if you're so worried. Don't humiliate him." "It's too late for that," Derek sneered. "I'm done with the eyesore." Derek pushed past Sophie and marched into the dining room, heading straight for Kenji. The entire restaurant seemed to sense the tension. The chatter died down. All eyes turned to table 48, the tiny table by the kitchen where a billionaire in disguise was sipping green tea, waiting for the storm to hit. The silence that fell over the Sterling Reserve was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Derek marched to table 14, his footsteps thudding against the plush carpet like the drumbeat of an executioner. He didn't stop until he was looming over Kenji, casting a long shadow over the old man's simple grey cardigan. "Sir," Derek said, his voice loud enough to carry to the mezzanine level, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave, now." Kenji slowly lowered his teacup. He didn't look frightened. He looked disappointed. "I have not finished my tea," he said calmly, "and I have placed an order." "We are not serving you," Derek announced, crossing his arms. He looked around the room, performing for the wealthy audience, trying to show them he was protecting their sanctuary from the unwashed masses. "Your presence is making our other guests uncomfortable, and frankly, the order you placed is, let's just call it, optimistic for someone of your financial appearance." Sophie rushed to the table, her hands trembling. "Derek, stop! He is a guest." "Be quiet, Sophie," Derek snapped, not even looking at her. He kept his eyes locked on Kenji. "This isn't a charity shelter. The wine you ordered costs more than you'll likely make in a lifetime. I'm not going to open a $14,000 bottle just so you can take a sip, laugh, and tell me you left your wallet in your other pants. Get out before I call the police for trespassing." The humiliation was visceral. At a nearby table, a group of young stockbrokers snickered. Jessica, the hostess, was watching from the doorway with a smirk, typing something rapidly on her phone, probably sharing the gossip. Kenji looked at Derek. His expression hardened. The gentle grandfather was gone. In his place was something colder, something made of steel and iron. "You judge a man by his clothes?" Kenji asked softly. "In my culture, we judge a man by his manners. You have none." Derek's face turned a violent shade of crimson. "Listen to me, you old fraud. I run this floor. I decide who eats and who starves. And you? You're done." He reached out and grabbed the canvas bag sitting on the empty chair. "Maybe if I throw your trash on the street, you'll follow it." "No!" Sophie screamed. She threw herself between Derek and the bag, shoving her manager back. It was a shocking breach of protocol. Staff never touched management. The room gasped. "Don't you dare touch his things," Sophie panted, her eyes blazing with tears and rage. "He has treated me with more respect in 10 minutes than you have in 3 years. If you want to kick him out, you have to drag me out too." Derek stumbled back, straightening his jacket. He looked at Sophie with pure venom. "Oh, don't worry, Sophie. That can be arranged." He turned to the dining room, raising his voice to a theatrical boom. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this disturbance. It seems our waitress has lost her mind, along with this vagrant. Security is on the way." He looked back at Sophie, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "You're fired, Sophie. Get your purse and get out. And don't expect a reference. I'll make sure you never work in this city again." Sophie felt her knees go weak. The medical bills, her mother's surgery, the rent. It all flashed before her eyes. She had just thrown it all away for a stranger. But as she looked down at Kenji, who was watching her with an intense, unreadable expression, she realized she didn't regret it. "I don't want to work for a man like you anyway," Sophie whispered, her voice breaking. She turned to Kenji. "I'm so sorry, Kenji-san. I can't serve you the wine." Kenji slowly stood up. He wasn't a tall man, but suddenly he seemed to fill the room. He picked up his cane, not to lean on it, but to hold it like a scepter. "Do not apologize, Sophie-san," Kenji said. His voice was no longer raspy. It was deep, resonant, and commanded absolute authority. You have performed your duties with honor. Now, I will perform mine." Kenji reached into the inside pocket of his frayed cardigan. Derek tensed, perhaps expecting a weapon. Instead, Kenji pulled out a sleek black titanium card. It wasn't a credit card. It was an access card. And on the back of it, embossed in gold, was a singular logo, a stylized hawk. Derek frowned. He didn't recognize it. But the man sitting at table 4, the tech CEO, did. He dropped his fork, the clatter echoing in the silent room. "Is that?" the CEO whispered, standing up. Kenji ignored the room. He held the card up to Derek. "Do you know who owns this building, Derek?" Kenji asked. "Mr. Sterling owns it," Derek scoffed, though his confidence was wavering. "Jonathan Sterling." "Jonathan Sterling owns the restaurant," Kenji corrected. "But who owns the debt? Who owns the land? Who owns the holding company that acquired Vantage Hospitality Group, Mr. Sterling's parent company, at 9:00 a.m. this morning?" Derek blinked. "What are you talking about?" Kenji pulled out an old flip phone, another item that looked cheap but was actually encrypted for high-level security. He pressed a single button. "Put it on speaker," Kenji ordered, thrusting the phone into Derek's chest. Derek, confused and starting to sweat, took the phone. "Hello?" Derek said tentatively. A voice roared from the tiny speaker. It was a voice Derek knew intimately. It was Jonathan Sterling, the owner of the restaurant, a man Derek feared more than God. "Whoever this is, get off my private line," Mr. Sterling shouted. "Mr. Sterling, it's Derek, from the restaurant. There's a situation here. A man is claim—" "Derek!" Sterling's voice changed instantly, dripping with panic. "Why do you have this number? Wait, are you with Mr. Kurosawa? Is he there? Is he at the restaurant?" Derek froze. He looked at the old man in the cardigan. "Mr. Kurosawa. Kenjiro Kurosawa," Sterling screamed through the phone. "The chairman of Kurosawa Global. He's flying in from Tokyo to inspect the assets. I was told he'd be there tomorrow. Derek, if he is there, you give him whatever he wants. He just bought the company, you idiot. He owns us. He owns me." The phone slipped from Derek's sweaty fingers and clattered onto the table. The silence in the restaurant was now deafening. The name Kurosawa hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Everyone in New York finance knew the name. Kurosawa Global was one of the largest conglomerates in the world. They built ships, skyscrapers, and cities, and the man standing in the grey cardigan was the patriarch of the empire. Kenji picked up the phone calmly and ended the call. He looked at Derek, who was now trembling so violently his knees were knocking together. "You called me a fraud," Kenji said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. "You tried to throw me out, and you fired the only person in this building who understands the meaning of service." Kenji took a step forward. "I am not a fraud, Derek. But you? You are a failure." The color had drained from Derek's face so completely he looked like a wax figure. He opened his mouth to speak, to beg, to explain, but no sound came out. Jessica, the hostess, seeing the ship sinking, tried to salvage the situation. She grabbed a menu and rushed over, forcing a bright, terrified smile. "Mr. Kurosawa, oh my goodness, we had no idea," she gushed, her voice shrill. "Please let me move you to the private dining room. We have the best view of the city. I can open that Romane Conti for you right now, on the house. Derek made a terrible mistake. But Kenji didn't even look at her. He raised one hand, silencing her instantly. "I do not want the private dining room," Kenji said. "I like this table. It is near the kitchen. I can hear the work. I can feel the reality." He turned his gaze back to Derek. "Pick up the phone," Kenji commanded. Derek fumbled for the flip phone on the table. Sir? "Call security," Kenji said. Derek's eyes widened with a glimmer of hope. Maybe the old man wanted to remove the other diners who were staring. Yes, right away, sir. I'll have them clear the room. No, Kenji cut him off. Call security to escort you out. The blood drained from the room. A gasp rippled through the onlookers. Me, Derek squeaked. You are fired, Kenji said simply. Effective immediately. You are banned from this property. You are banned from any property owned by Kurosawa Global. That includes the hotel across the street, the bank on the corner, and the airline you likely use to visit your mother. Derek fell to his knees. It was a pathetic sight. The tyrant who had terrorized his staff for years was now sobbing on the floor of the dining room. Please, Mr. Kurosawa, I have a mortgage. I didn't know. It was a misunderstanding. It was not a misunderstanding, Kenji said, looking down at him with cold indifference. It was a revelation of character. You treat the powerful with fawning deceit and the powerless with cruelty. I have no use for men like you. Two burly security guards, who had been summoned by the commotion, arrived at the entrance. They looked confused, seeing their manager on the floor. Kenji gestured to Derek. Remove him. The guards hesitated. They looked at Derek, then at the old man in the cardigan. Do it! Yelled a voice from the entrance. Jonathan Sterling himself came bursting through the doors, breathless and disheveled, clearly having sprinted from his office nearby. He looked at Kenji and bowed deeply, almost 90 degrees. Mr. Kurosawa, 1,000 apologies, Sterling gasped. He turned to the guards and pointed at Derek. Get him out of here! Throw him in the street! As the guards dragged a weeping, thrashing Derek out of the restaurant, the dining room broke into hushed, excited whispers. The show was better than any Broadway play. Kenji watched Derek disappear, then turned to Mr. Sterling. Mr. Sterling, Kenji said. Yes, Chairman. Anything. Sterling was sweating profusely. You have allowed a culture of arrogance to rot this business, Kenji said. This hostess, he pointed at Jessica, who shrank back against the wall, laughed at a guest. She is also dismissed. Jessica let out a sob, covering her mouth, and ran toward the staff lockers before she could be publicly shamed. Consider it done, Sterling said rapidly. I will hire a whole new management team tomorrow. I will— No need, Kenji interrupted. I have already found your new general manager. Sterling looked confused. Sir? Kenji turned slowly. He looked at Sophie. She was standing by the service station, clutching her tray, looking like she wanted to wake up from this fever dream. Sophie-san, Kenji said, his voice returning to that gentle warmth from before. Sophie shook her head. Mr. Kurosawa, I don't know what to say. You were willing to lose your livelihood to protect the dignity of a stranger, Kenji said. You possess the one thing that cannot be taught. Integrity. He turned to Sterling. Sophie is the new general manager of the Sterling Reserve. Her salary will be triple what Derek's was, and she will have full authority to restructure the staff as she sees fit. Sterling's jaw dropped. But, sir, she's a waitress. She's 24. She has no executive experience. Kenji's eyes narrowed. She has more executive potential in her little finger than you have in your entire board of directors. Do you dispute my decision? No, absolutely not, Sterling stammered. He turned to Sophie and forced a smile. Congratulations. Ms. Miller. Sophie felt the room spinning. Kenji-san, I can't run a restaurant. I have to take care of my mum. I have debt. Kenji walked over to her. He took her rough, work-worn hands in his own. We will discuss the details over dinner, he smiled. But first, I believe we have a bottle of wine to drink. The atmosphere in the restaurant transformed instantly. The staff, previously terrified, were now looking at Sophie with awe and hope. The kitchen crew peeked out from the swinging doors, grinning. They had hated Derek. Sophie was one of them. She was the one who shared her tips with the bus boys and helped the dishwashers when they were swamped. Mr. Sterling, eager to please, practically sprinted to the wine cellar. He returned moments later, cradling the bottle of 1945 Romane Conti like a newborn baby. "Shall I decant this for you, Mr. Kurosawa?" Sterling asked, trembling. "No," Kenji said. "Sophie will do it." Sterling handed the bottle to Sophie. She took it, her hands still shaking, but she fell into the rhythm of her training. She presented the label, cut the foil, and uncorked the bottle with a soft pop that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. She poured a small amount for Kenji to taste. He swirled it, sniffed it, and took a sip. He nodded. "Excellent. Pour for yourself, Sophie." "Okay," she whispered. She poured a glass for herself. Kenji raised his glass. The entire restaurant watched. "To kindness," Kenji said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The most expensive currency in the world." They clinked glasses. Sophie took a sip. It tasted like velvet and berries, but mostly it tasted like victory. "Now," Kenji said, setting his glass down. "Sit, Sophie. We have business." Sophie sat in the chair opposite him, the chair Derek had tried to kick her out of. "You mentioned your mother," Kenji said, cutting into his Wagyu beef, which the chef had prepared personally and garnished with gold leaf. "Spinal surgery?" "Yes," Sophie said, feeling tears prick her eyes again. "Stenosis. She can barely walk. The specialists are at Mount Sinai, but the cost is prohibitive," Kenji finished. "It's about $80,000, Sophie admitted. "I've saved $4,000 in 3 years. Kenji pulled out his phone again. He tapped out a text message. "It is done," he said. "What?" "I have a philanthropic medical trust," Kenji explained casually, as if discussing the weather. "I just messaged my director. Your mother will be transferred to a private suite at Mount Sinai tomorrow morning. Dr. Oris Thorne, the best neurosurgeon in the country, will perform the operation on Friday. All expenses are covered, including rehabilitation." Sophie choked. She covered her mouth, the tears finally spilling over. "Why? Why would you do that? I just brought you tea." Kenji stopped eating. He looked at her with a profound sadness that hinted at a long, lonely life. "Sophie-san," he said, "I have billions of dollars. I have houses in Tokyo, London, and Paris. I have armies of employees who bow to me because they fear me or because they want my money. Do you know how long it has been since someone looked at me and saw just a human being? A human being worthy of respect, even without the fancy suit?" He leaned forward. "You gave me the only thing I cannot buy. You gave me your humanity. To me, that is worth more than $80,000. It is priceless." Sophie cried. She cried for the stress of the last few years leaving her body, for the relief of her mother's future, and for the sheer, overwhelming beauty of the moment. But the story wasn't over, because while Derek was gone, the rot in the restaurant went deeper than just one manager, and Kenji Kurosawa was a man who believed in cleaning house completely. "Now," Kenji said, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin, "eat your steak, Sophie. You will need your strength, because tomorrow the real work begins. We are going to change everything." As they ate, a man in a sharp suit approached the table. It wasn't staff. It was the tech CEO from Table 4. "Mr. Kurosawa," the CEO said, his voice reverent. "I apologize for the intrusion. I'm Mark Halloway, CEO of Halloway Tech. I just wanted to say, that was the most inspiring thing I have ever seen." Kenji looked at him. "Mr. Halloway, I saw you laughing when Derek insulted me." The CEO froze. The smile died on his face. Well, I wasn't laughing at you, sir. I was just—" "You were complicit," Kenji said coldly. "Silence is complicity." Kenji turned to Sophie. "Manager Sophie, this man is disturbing my dinner. What should we do with him?" Sophie looked at the billionaire CEO, then at Kenji. She realized the test. It wasn't about revenge. It was about standards. She wiped her tears, sat up straighter, and looked Mark Halloway in the eye. "Mr. Halloway," Sophie said, her voice steady, "please return to your table and finish your meal quietly, or you can leave. But we don't tolerate bullying here. Not from staff, and not from guests." Kenji smiled, a wide, proud grin. The CEO nodded rapidly, his face red, and scurried back to his seat like a scolded schoolboy. "You learn fast," Kenji chuckled. But just as the evening seemed to be winding down into a perfect victory, the front doors banged open again. It wasn't Derek. It was a woman. She was dressed in Chanel from head to toe, holding a clutch that cost more than a car. She had sharp features and cold, calculating eyes. It was Lydia Sterling, Jonathan Sterling's wife, and she was notorious for being the real power and the real terror behind the restaurant. She walked in, looked at the weeping Jessica, the missing Derek, and her husband bowing to an old man in a cardigan. "What on earth is going on here?" she shrieked. "Why is the staff crying? And why is a waitress sitting at a VIP table drinking my Romane Conti?" Kenji sighed, putting down his fork. "Ah," he whispered to Sophie. "The final boss." Lydia Sterling didn't walk. She marched. She was a woman who had spent 40 years curating an image of untouchable wealth. Her hair was a helmet of blonde lacquer, her jewelry was heavy enough to sink a small boat, and her presence sucked the warmth out of the room faster than an open freezer. She stopped at table 14, her eyes practically vibrating with rage. She ignored her husband, Jonathan, who was hovering behind her like a terrified ghost. She ignored the security guards. She only saw two things: a peasant wearing her staff uniform sitting in a guest chair, and a dirty-looking old man drinking her best vintage. "Get up!" Lydia spat at Sophie. "Get up right now. Take off that apron and get out of my restaurant before I have you arrested for theft." Sophie's instinct was to jump up and apologize. Old habits died hard. She gripped the tablecloth, her knuckles white, but then she looked across the table at Kenji. He was sipping his wine, completely unbothered. He gave her a tiny nod. "Stay." Sophie took a deep breath. She didn't move. Lydia's eyes widened. "Are you deaf? I said move!" She reached out, her manicured claws aiming for the bottle of Romane Conti. "And you," she sneered at Kenji. "Give me that. This wine is for human beings, not gutter trash." "Lydia, stop!" Jonathan Sterling squeaked, grabbing her elbow. "Please, for the love of God, stop talking. That is Mr. Kurosawa." Lydia ripped her arm away. "I don't care if he's the Pope. Look at him, Jonathan. He's wearing a cardigan from a thrift store. You're letting these people make a mockery of our brand." Kenji set his glass down. The sound of the crystal hitting the wood was soft, yet it silenced Lydia mid-rant. "Mrs. Sterling," Kenji said. His voice was no longer the voice of a grandfather. It was the voice of a man who had negotiated treaties and collapsed economies. "I have just fired your floor manager. I have dismissed your hostess, and I have promoted Sophie to general manager. If you touch that bottle, you will be the next to leave." Lydia let out a shrill, incredulous laugh. You fired my staff? You don't have the authority to fire a dishwasher. I own 51% of the voting shares in this restaurant. You senile old fool. My husband might be weak, but I am not. This is my kingdom." She turned to the security guards. "Grab this man, throw him out, and throw the girl out with him. If you don't, you're all fired." The guards looked at each other, then at Jonathan Sterling. Jonathan was shaking his head frantically, mouthing, "No, no, no." Kenji sighed. He looked tired again. I hoped it would not come to this. I dislike complicated paperwork. He reached into his canvas bag again. This time he didn't pull out a book or a card. He pulled out a thick, legal-sized folder. He placed it on the table and opened it. "Mrs. Sterling, you are correct," Kenji said, running a finger down a document. "You do own 51% of the Sterling Reserve LLC. However, that LLC is heavily leveraged. You took out 3 loans against the business to fund your vacations in Monaco and your plastic surgery clinic in Brazil. Is that correct?" Lydia froze. Her face went pale beneath her heavy makeup. That's private financial information." "It is public," Kenji corrected, "when the bank sells the debt. You see, the bank that held your loans, Centurion First, they were worried about your missed payments. They were looking for a buyer for the debt." Kenji took a sip of wine. "At 9:15 a.m. this morning, Kurosawa Global purchased Centurion First." Lydia stepped back, hitting the edge of a neighboring table. You bought the bank?" "I bought the bank," Kenji confirmed, "which means I own your debt. And according to Clause 4B of your loan agreement," Kenji tapped the paper, "if the debtor acts in a way that damages the reputation of the asset, the creditor has the right to call in the full loan immediately." Kenji looked up at her. His eyes were cold steel. "I am calling in the loan, Lydia. $11 million. Payable now." Lydia gasped. I don't have $11 million liquid. It's tied up in assets." "Then I am exercising the foreclosure clause," Kenji said, closing the folder. "As of this moment, ownership of this restaurant reverts to the creditor. Me." He turned to Sophie. "Sophie-san, as general manager, would you like to have this woman removed from the premises?" The power dynamic in the room didn't just shift, it evaporated and reformed instantly. Lydia Sterling, the terror of Midtown, was suddenly just a woman in debt, standing in a building she no longer owned. Sophie stood up. She didn't scream, she didn't shout. She channeled the quiet dignity Kenji had shown her. "Lydia," Sophie said, "you have treated us like dirt for years. You made fun of my shoes. You mocked the busboy's accent. You made people cry for sport." Sophie pointed to the door. "Please leave, and don't take the silverware on your way out." Lydia looked around the room. She looked for an ally. But the customers, the same wealthy elite she tried so hard to impress, were looking at her with pity and amusement. They loved a winner, and she had just lost. With a strangled sob of humiliation, Lydia Sterling turned and ran. She fled through the heavy oak doors, her heels clicking frantically, escaping the ruin of her own making. Jonathan Sterling stood there, looking at the empty doorway, then back at Kenji. "Mr. Kurosawa," Jonathan whispered, "does this mean, am I out too?" Kenji looked at the man. "You stood by while your wife abused your staff. You are weak, Jonathan. But you are not malicious. You may stay on as a consultant. But you report to Sophie. If she tells you to scrub the floors, you will scrub the floors. Do you understand?" Jonathan nodded vigorously, looking like a man who had just escaped a firing squad. "Yes. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." Kenji turned back to Sophie. He raised his wine glass. "To new beginnings, Sophie-san." 6 months later. The sign outside the restaurant hadn't changed much. It still said, "The Sterling Reserve," but beneath it, in smaller, elegant gold lettering, it now read, "Managed by S. Miller." Inside, however, everything was different. The stiff, suffocating atmosphere was gone. The music was softer, warmer. The staff no longer walked with their heads down, terrified of a manager's wrath. They moved with purpose and pride. The uniforms were new, tailored, and comfortable, and the food was better. Sophie had fired the head chef, a man who screamed at his sous chefs, and promoted a young, talented woman from the Bronx who infused the menu with passion rather than pretension. It was a Tuesday night, usually a slow time, but the restaurant was packed. Sophie walked through the dining room. She wasn't wearing an apron anymore. She wore a sharp, navy blue blazer and tailored trousers. She stopped at table 5 to chat with a regular, then checked in with the sommelier. "How are we doing on the inventory, David?" she asked. "Excellent, boss," David beamed. "The new shipment from Napa just arrived. Oh, and table 14 is waiting for you." Sophie's heart did a little jump. Table 14, the bad table by the kitchen. She had retired the table from general use. It was permanently reserved. She walked to the back. There, sitting in the same spot, drinking tea from the same simple ceramic cup, was Kenji. He looked healthier than he had 6 months ago. His color was better, and he wore a slightly nicer cardigan, though it was still modest. "Kenji-san," Sophie smiled, bowing slightly, a habit she had re-embraced. "Sophie-san," Kenji returned the bow from his seat. "You look tired. But it is a good tired, the tired of accomplishment." "It's been a busy week," Sophie laughed, sitting opposite him. "We're fully booked until Christmas." "And your mother?" Kenji asked. Sophie's smile widened, lighting up her entire face. "She's walking without the cane now. She actually came in for lunch yesterday. She tried to wait tables, Kenji. I had to tell her to sit down." Kenji chuckled, a warm, rasping sound. "That is good. Very good." He reached into his bag. "I have something for you." He pulled out a set of keys. They weren't car keys. They were heavy, old-fashioned iron keys. "What is this?" Sophie asked. "I am returning to Japan tomorrow," Kenji said softly. "My work here is done. The company is stable. The bad weeds have been pulled." "You're leaving?" Sophie felt a pang of panic. "But who will I report to? Who will check the numbers?" "You will," Kenji said. "Those are the keys to the deed box in the safe. I have transferred the ownership of the restaurant building to a trust." He looked her in the eye. "The trust is in your name, Sophie." Sophie stopped breathing. "Kenji, no, I can't. That's millions of dollars. I'm just a manager." "You are not just a manager," Kenji said firmly. "You are the soul of this place. I told you, I have no need for more money. I need legacy. I need to know that when I am gone, there are places in this world where a tired old man can walk in, wearing a grey cardigan, and be treated like a king." He reached across the table and patted her hand. "You gave me that, Sophie. You broke the cycle of cruelty. Now, you own the ground you stand on. Do not let anyone move you." Tears streamed down Sophie's face, but she didn't wipe them away. She stood up, walked around the table and hugged him. It was unprofessional. It broke every rule of high-end dining, and nobody cared. The staff watched, smiling. The guests watched, sensing the moment. "Thank you," she whispered into his shoulder. "Domo arigato," Kenji patted her back. "Duita shimashite." "You are welcome," he whispered back. He stood up, took his cane, and picked up his canvas bag. "Keep the tea hot, Sophie-san. I may come back one day to check on my investment." "It will always be ready," she promised. Kenji Kurosawa walked out of the restaurant, moving slowly but steadily. He walked past the hostess stand where a kind young man was greeting guests with a genuine smile. He walked out onto the busy Manhattan street, disappearing into the crowd. Sophie watched him go. Then She dried her eyes, straightened her blazer, and turned back to the room. "All right, everyone," she said to her team, her voice strong and clear. "Let's get back to work. We have guests to serve." The waitress who had been invisible was now the queen of her own world, and she built her kingdom not on greed, but on 4 simple words whispered in the dark. "Can I help you?" So, what is the true measure of a person? Is it the brand of their suit, the limit on their credit card, or the way they treat those who can do nothing for them? Derek and Lydia Sterling believed power was a weapon to crush others. They thought they were untouchable in their castle of gold. But they forgot the most ancient rule of karma. You never know who you are talking to. Sophie didn't know Kenji was a billionaire. She didn't know he could buy the building. She helped him because she saw a human being in need of kindness. In a world obsessed with image, her integrity was the only currency that mattered. It reminds us that while money can buy a restaurant, it cannot buy loyalty, respect, or a legacy. What would you have done if you were in Sophie's shoes? Have you ever been judged by your appearance? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please smash that like button, share this video with your friends to remind them that kindness always wins, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories every week. Turn on that notification bell so you never miss a moment of the drama. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.